Hold it steady, watch the pivot arm. We've got him clear, start the swing to the right.
The weight of gratitude, an elephant's promise. The distress call pierced through the humid morning air of Karnataka's Western Ghats, carrying with it the kind of urgency that made Dr. Priya Sharma's hands pause over her surgical instruments. 22 years of wildlife veterinary practice had taught her to read the subtle notes in a ranger's voice, the difference between routine and critical, between hope and despair. This call sang of despair. "Doctor, we have a situation." Ranger Devraj's voice crackled through the satellite phone, the connection wavering like his composure. Adult female elephant, possibly pregnant, trapped in a mud pit. She's been there at least 18 hours, maybe more. The locals say they heard trumpeting all through the night. Priya was already moving, her mind cataloguing supplies, even as her assistant began pulling the emergency kit from storage. How deep? Several meters. Doctor, she's barely keeping her trunk above the surface. And there's a calf. Won't leave the edge. Can't be more than 2 years old. The morning sun had just begun to paint the forest canopy gold, but Priya knew that same sun would become their enemy within hours. In the humid crucible of the Western Ghats, a trapped elephant could succumb to heat exhaustion long before drowning became the primary concern. And if she was pregnant, as the distension Devraj described suggested, "Mobilize everyone," she told him. "I mean everyone. We'll need the crane from the construction site, every rope we have, and call Krishnan from the forest department. Tell him we need his entire emergency response team." As her modified ambulance, a military surplus truck retrofitted with veterinary equipment, rumbled down the forest track, Priya allowed herself a moment to consider what they were racing toward. Asian elephants, for all their size and strength, possessed a vulnerability that never failed to move her. They mourned their dead, celebrated their young, and maintained family bonds that spanned decades. The calf at the edge of that pit wasn't just watching its mother struggle, it was witnessing its entire world threatening to sink beneath the surface. The rescue site materialized through the morning mist like something from a photographer's nightmare. The mud pit stretched nearly 15 meters across, its edges crumbling with each movement from below. And there, in the center of this earthen trap, was their patient. Even from a distance, Priya could see the situation was worse than described. The elephant, a magnificent matriarch, she estimated at around 35 years old, had sunk so deep that only her head, trunk, and the uppermost curve of her back remained visible. Her eyes, those ancient pools of wisdom that had likely seen 4 decades of forest life, now reflected pure exhaustion. Each breath came with visible effort, her trunk swaying weakly like a reed in a dying wind. But it was the calf that broke Priya's professional composure. The young elephant, perhaps 18 months old, stood at the pit's edge with a devotion that transcended species. His little trunk reached toward his mother repeatedly, touching the air where she should be, where she had always been until this moment. When the matriarch's trunk briefly surfaced to gasp for air, the calf's desperate attempts to intertwine with it spoke of a bond that no amount of mud could sever. "My God," whispered Maya Patel, the young conservation officer who had joined the team just 6 months ago. This was her first major rescue, and the weight of it showed in her trembling hands. How did she even fall in? These pits shouldn't exist here. Krishnan Nair, the Forest Department's senior emergency coordinator, surveyed the scene with the practiced eye of someone who had seen humanity's impact on wildlife for 3 decades. "Illegal mining," he said quietly. "They dig these pits to extract minerals, then abandon them when the monsoon makes it unprofitable. The rain turns them into death traps." The next hour unfolded in controlled chaos. The construction crane arrived on a flatbed truck. Its driver, a burly Sikh named Harpreet Singh, who had volunteered his services, backing it into position with millimeter precision. Ropes appeared from every vehicle, along with a growing crowd of volunteers from the nearby village. Among them was Lakshmi Amma, an 80-year-old woman whose family had lived alongside these elephants for generations. She approached Priya with a reverence that spoke of old traditions. "This one, we know her. she said in accented English. We call her Kaveri, after the river. She brings her family to drink at the temple pond during drought, never causes trouble, always waits for the people to finish before approaching. The name humanized what was already deeply personal. Kaveri. A mother with a name, a history, a place in the delicate web of coexistence between human and elephant. First thing, Priya announced to the assembled team, we need to stabilize her before any extraction attempt. She's exhausted, probably dehydrated, and the stress could trigger premature labor if she's pregnant. I need to get close enough to administer sedatives. Too dangerous, Krishnan protested. The edge is unstable. One wrong step, and you'll be in there with her. But Priya was already securing a harness around her waist, attached to a rope that Harpreet would control from the crane. Then make sure you pull me out. If it collapses, she said with a grim smile that didn't reach her eyes. The descent toward Kaveri was a negotiation with gravity and mud. Each step had to be tested, trusted, then abandoned as Priya moved closer to the struggling elephant. The calf watched her approach with intelligent eyes, seeming to understand that this strange, small creature might be salvation rather than threat. When Priya finally reached a position where she could assess Kaveri properly, her worst fears were confirmed. The elephant's breathing was shallow and rapid, perhaps 30 breaths per minute when it should be 4 to 6. Her visible skin showed signs of pressure necrosis where the mud had compressed tissue for too long. And yes, the abdominal distension was unmistakable. Kaveri was pregnant, likely in her 20th or 21st month of gestation. We have 3 lives here, Priya called back to the team. Mother, calf, and unborn. Whatever we do fast. The sedative had to be calculated perfectly, enough to calm Kaveri and prevent her from struggling during extraction, but not so much that it would compromise her already taxed respiratory system or affect the unborn calf. Priya loaded the dart gun with hands that remained steady, despite the weight of decision. Sorry, beautiful, she whispered to Kaveri. This is going to sting, but it's the beginning of help. The dart found its mark in the exposed shoulder muscle. Kaveri's trumpet of surprise was weak, more exhale than exclamation. Her calf responded with his own trumpet, high, piercing, a child's cry that needed no translation. Maya had been tasked with keeping the calf calm and away from the edge, a job that required her to overcome her own fear of being so close to a wild elephant, even a young one. She approached slowly, speaking in the soft Hindi her grandmother had used to calm horses. Shh, Shota beta, shh. Your mama will be okay. We're here to help. To everyone's surprise, the calf allowed her approach, even accepting the gentle touch of her hand on his rough hide. Perhaps desperation makes trust possible across species boundaries, or perhaps elephants understand intention in ways we're only beginning to comprehend. As the sedative took effect, Kaveri's struggles lessened. Her trunk, which had been constantly seeking purchase on the pit's edges, began to relax. This was the critical window. Excavation team, move in, Krishnan commanded. A dozen men with shovels descended upon the pit's edge, beginning the delicate work of creating a ramp. But the mud was like quicksand. For every shovelful removed, it seemed 2 more slid in to replace it. This isn't working, called out Ravi, one of the volunteers, his frustration evident. We need a different approach. It was Harpreet who provided the solution. In Punjab, when we rescue cattle from wells, we don't dig them out. We float them out. He gestured to his truck. I have industrial foam blocks for construction, if we can get them under her. Brilliant, Priya said, but we'll need to get straps under her first for the crane. This was perhaps the most dangerous phase of the operation. 3 volunteers, Ravi, his brother Suresh, and a young man named Abbas, who had arrived on a motorcycle with nothing but determination to help, volunteered to enter the pit with guide ropes. They worked with a synchronization born of desperation, sliding heavy canvas straps beneath Kaveri's massive body. The elephant, sedated but still conscious, watched them with eyes that seemed to understand. Once, when Abbas slipped and nearly went under, her trunk moved slightly, pushing him back toward stable ground. Even in her extremity, the maternal instinct to protect the vulnerable remained. Straps secure, Ravi called out, mud-covered and exhausted. The crane's engine roared to life. Harpreet's experienced hands working the controls with the delicacy of a surgeon. The straps grew taut, and for a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Kaveri was simply too heavy, too deeply mired. More power, someone shouted. No, Priya countered quickly. Too much force, and will injure her. Harpreet, can you create a rocking motion, back and forth? The crane operator nodded, understanding immediately. Like freeing a car from snow, sometimes momentum was more valuable than pure force. Back and forth, each movement loosening the mud's grip incrementally. The crowd had grown to nearly 100 people, all watching in tense silence. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. No bird calls, no insect buzz, just the rumble of machinery and the squelch of mud. Then, like a cork from a bottle, Kaveri began to rise. She's moving, Maya cried out, tears streaming down her face without shame. Inch by inch, the elephant emerged from what had nearly become her grave. As her body cleared the mud, the full extent of her ordeal became visible. Pressure sores covered her sides. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, and her distended belly showed signs of stress that made Priya's medical mind race with concern. But she was alive. Gloriously, magnificently, impossibly alive. The moment Kaveri's feet touched solid ground, her calf was there. The reunion was poetry in motion. Trunks intertwining, the calf pressing against his mother's muddy legs, soft rumbles of communication that needed no translation. Love sounds the same in every language, across every species. Don't celebrate yet, Priya warned. Though her own eyes were moist, she needs immediate medical attention. Set up the IV lines. We need to get fluids in her now. The next hours were a blur of medical intervention. Intravenous fluids to combat dehydration, antibiotics to prevent infection from the pressure wounds, careful monitoring of fetal heart tones to ensure the unborn calf had survived the ordeal. Kaveri submitted to it all, with a patience that spoke of either trust or exhaustion, perhaps both. As the sun reached its zenith, painting the rescue site in harsh light that made everyone squint, Priya made a decision that went against standard protocol. We're not separating them, she announced, referring to Kaveri and her calf. Usually, we'd take her to the veterinary facility alone, but that calf has been traumatized enough. They go together. The logistics of transporting not one but two elephants required innovation. The construction crew, led by Harpreet, created a modified platform on the truck bed, reinforcing it with steel beams. It took another 2 hours, and the crane's assistance to load Kaveri, who was still too weak to climb the ramp independently. Her calf, whom Maya had begun calling Chintu, little one, followed without hesitation, trumpeting softly as if encouraging his mother. The image of the baby elephant, gently pushing against his mother's hind legs, trying to help her up the ramp, would later become the defining photograph of the rescue, shared across social media with captions in a dozen languages, all expressing the same wonder at love's persistence. The journey to the Forest Department's veterinary facility was a crawl through forest roads, Harpreet driving with the care of someone transporting Crystal. In the back, Priya and her team maintained constant vigilance, adjusting IV drips, monitoring vital signs, and offering what comfort they could to two traumatized souls. It was during this journey that Kaveri did something extraordinary. Despite her weakness, despite the sedation still working through her system, she reached out her trunk and gently touched Priya's face. The gesture lasted only seconds, but the veterinarian would later describe it as one of the most profound moments of her career, an interspecies acknowledgement of help given and received. The veterinary facility, a sprawling complex hidden in the forest, specifically designed for treating elephants, received them like returning heroes. Dr. James Matthews, a British veterinarian who had made India his home 20 years ago, was waiting with his team. Good God, he breathed when he saw Kaveri's condition. How long was she trapped? At least 18 hours, Possibly 24, Priya replied, exhaustion making her voice hoarse. She's pregnant, James. Third trimester by my estimation. The next 72 hours were critical. Kaveri developed a fever on the second night, her body fighting infections from a dozen sources. The unborn calf's heart rate dropped dangerously low, forcing the medical team to make difficult decisions about intervention versus allowing nature to take its course. It was Chintu who perhaps saved them all. The young elephant refused to leave his mother's side, and his constant gentle touches, his soft vocalizations, seemed to give Kaveri the will to fight. Elephants understand death. They mourn, they remember, they even revisit the bones of their deceased. But they also understand hope, and Chintu was hope incarnate, a reason to survive made flesh. On the fourth day, Kaveri's fever broke. On the fifth, she stood without assistance for the first time. On the sixth, she began eating, her trunk exploring the specially prepared meal of bamboo, bananas, and medicinal herbs, with something approaching her old curiosity. But it was on the seventh day that magic happened. Priya had arrived early to check on her patients, finding the morning shift workers clustered around Kaveri's enclosure with expressions of amazement. There, in the soft dawn light, were not 2 elephants, but 3. During the night, Kaveri had given birth. The calf, a female, was perfect despite her traumatic gestation. She stood on wobbling legs, her trunk not yet fully under control, swinging like a child learning to use a new limb. Chintu had appointed himself big brother and guardian, positioning himself between the newborn and any perceived threat, including the amazed veterinary staff. She did it, Maya whispered, having driven 2 hours from her station when she heard the news. She actually did it. Dr. Matthews was running every test in his considerable arsenal, but his conclusion was simple. Mother and baby are healthy. It's bloody miraculous, but they're healthy. The celebration was subdued, everyone aware of how close they had come to tragedy, but genuine. Lakshmi Amma arrived with temple offerings, insisting on performing a small puja for the elephant's well-being. The construction crew, led by Harpreet, brought sweets to distribute. Even the local government officials, usually content to take credit from a distance, came to witness what was already being called the miracle of the mud pit. But recovery is not just physical. As the weeks passed and Kaveri regained her strength, the psychological impact of her ordeal became apparent. She was nervous around any depression in the ground, carefully testing each step when walking. She kept her calves, both Chintu and the newborn, whom the staff had named Asha, Hope, closer than typical elephant behavior would suggest. She remembers, Priya observed, watching Kaveri navigate around a small puddle with excessive caution. The trauma is still there. It would take 6 months before the forest department deemed Kaveri and her family ready to return to the wild. 6 months of gradual rehabilitation, of teaching Asha the skills she would need, of ensuring Kaveri's psychological wounds had healed along with the physical ones. The release was planned for the beginning of the monsoon season, when water would be plentiful and food abundant. The location was carefully chosen, a protected area of the forest far from any mining activity, where a matriarchal herd had been observed that might accept Kaveri and her calves. The entire rescue team assembled for the farewell. Maya had a new confidence about her, having assisted in dozens of smaller rescues since that dramatic day. Krishnan had used the publicity from Kaveri's rescue to push through stronger regulations against illegal mining. Harpreet had become something of a local hero, his construction company receiving contracts, specifically because of his role in the rescue. But it was Priya who struggled most with the goodbye. Over 6 months, she had developed a bond with Kaveri that transcended the usual veterinarian-patient relationship. She had watched this elephant mother fight for her life, bring new life into the world against all odds, and slowly reclaim her wild dignity. The release itself was anticlimactic in the best way. The transport containers were opened, and Kaveri walked out slowly, deliberately, her calves following. She stood at the forest edge for a long moment, her trunk raised, testing the air, remembering or perhaps relearning the scent of home. Then, just before disappearing into the green embrace of the forest, she turned. Her gaze found Priya's across the distance, and for a moment that stretched like eternity, they looked at each other. Then Kaveri raised her trunk in what everyone present would swear was a farewell, before leading her children into their reclaimed kingdom. "That's that, then," Dr. Matthews said, his British understatement failing to hide his emotion. But that wasn't that. Not quite. To be continued. Before we continue with the extraordinary second chapter of Kaveri's story, where gratitude takes a form none of the rescue team could have imagined, take a moment to reflect. Have you ever wondered if the animals we help remember us? If the bonds formed in crisis transcend the moment of rescue? Drop a comment below sharing your own experience with animal intelligence or gratitude. What you're about to read might change how you see these connections forever. Please say continue or okay to read part 2. The Gratitude Arc. Part 2. The Gratitude Arc. Chapter 1. The Monsoon's Fury. 6 months had passed since Kaveri's release, and the Western Ghats had transformed into their monsoon glory. Rivers that had been mere trickles now roared with purpose, and the forest had exploded into 1,000 shades of green that would make poets weep for adequate words. For Dr. Priya Sharma, life had returned to its familiar rhythm, treating injured langurs, rescuing trapped leopard cubs, tending to the endless stream of wildlife casualties that came with human-animal coexistence. But Kaveri was never far from her thoughts. The Forest Department's camera traps occasionally captured images of the elephant family, confirming they had successfully integrated with a larger herd. Asha had grown remarkably, her playful antics caught in grainy footage that Priya kept saved on her phone. Chintu was developing the broad shoulders that would one day make him a formidable bull. And Kaveri, majestic Kaveri, had reclaimed her role as a matriarch, often seen leading the herd to water sources with the confidence of one who had faced death and chosen life. It was the 3rd week of July when the monsoon turned vicious. What began as the usual seasonal rains escalated into what meteorologists were calling a once-in-a-century weather event. The rainfall in 48 hours exceeded what typically fell in a month. Rivers burst their banks, hillsides liquefied into mudslides, and the forest roads that connected remote communities became raging torrents. Priya received the emergency call at 3 in the morning, the satellite phone's shrill ring cutting through the sound of rain hammering on her tin roof. "Doctor, we need you at the Kedarnath outpost immediately." Krishnan's voice was barely audible over the storm. "The Bhima River Bridge is gone. We have 30 tourists trapped at the elephant viewing camp, and the water's rising." The elephant viewing camp was a Forest Department initiative, a raised platform where tourists could safely observe wild elephants coming to drink at a natural watering hole. It was considered one of the safest wildlife experiences in the region. But with the Bhima River now a monster of mud and debris, that safety had become a trap. "Can we helicopter them out?" Priya asked, already pulling on her rain gear. "Negative. Visibility is 0. Winds are gusting at 80 kilometers per hour. We're going to have to go overland." "But Doctor..." Krishnan paused, and in that pause, Priya heard fear. "The only route left is through the elephant corridor, the same area where we released Kaveri." The significance wasn't lost on her. During monsoon, elephants typically moved to higher ground, but the corridors they used were ancient pathways, worn by thousands of years of migration. Humans entering these corridors during emergency movement could trigger stampedes. It was dangerous on a clear day. In this storm, it was potentially suicidal. "I'm on my way," she said. The rescue team, assembled at the forest checkpost, looked like survivors from an apocalypse. Maya was there, her young face set with determination, despite the fear in her eyes. Harpreet had arrived with his construction crew and heavy equipment. Even old Lakshmi Amma had come, insisting that her knowledge of traditional forest paths might help. "The situation is worse than I told you," Krishnan briefed them, his rain poncho doing little to keep him dry. "The viewing camp platform is strong, but the stilts are showing stress. We have 8 hours, maybe less, before it collapses. 30 people, including 12 children. What about the regular rescue teams? Maya asked, dealing with evacuations in 3 other locations. We're it. The journey into the forest was a nightmare of sliding mud, falling trees, and visibility that barely extended beyond the front of their vehicles. Twice they had to stop to clear massive teak trees that had fallen across the path. The small convoy, 2 Forest Department jeeps, Harpreet's truck with emergency equipment, and Priya's medical vehicle, moved at a crawl through the deluge. It was at the 3rd fallen tree that everything changed. They had all dismounted to help clear the path when Maya grabbed Priya's arm, her grip tight with alarm. "Doctor, listen." Through the sound of rain and wind came something else, a deep rumbling that seemed to come from the earth itself. But it wasn't thunder, and it wasn't a landslide. It was elephants, many elephants. "The herd," Krishnan breathed. "They're moving through the corridor. We're directly in their path." The team froze. Protocol in such situations was clear. Get off the path, find high ground, wait for the herd to pass. But there was no high ground here, no time to retreat, and 30 lives hanging in the balance ahead of them. The rumbling grew closer. In the lightning flashes, they began to see shapes, massive, moving shadows that seemed part of the storm itself. The herd was perhaps 50 strong, maybe more, moving with the purposeful speed of creatures who knew where safety lay. "Everyone stay calm," Priya instructed, though her own heart was hammering. "No sudden movements. They'll go around us if we don't threaten them." But the lead elephant didn't go around. It stopped directly in front of their convoy, its massive form suddenly visible in the headlights. And in that moment of electric illumination, Priya's breath caught. The elephant's left ear had a distinctive tear, a V-shaped notch that Priya had documented 6 months ago. The way she held her head, slightly tilted when assessing danger, the protective positioning of her body. "Kaveri," Priya whispered. As if hearing her name, the elephant moved closer. Behind her, Chintu appeared, no longer the small calf from the rescue, but a confident young bull. And beside him, little Asha, her tiny trunk raised in curiosity despite the storm. For a moment that seemed to stretch beyond time's normal boundaries, the 2 groups, human and elephant, regarded each other through the storm. Then Kaveri did something extraordinary. She trumpeted, not the sharp blast of warning, but a different sound, softer despite its volume, almost conversational. The herd behind her stopped their forward movement, waiting. "She recognizes us," Maya said in wonder. "She actually recognizes us." Kaveri approached Priya's vehicle, her trunk extended. Priya, operating on instinct rather than training, stepped forward. The trunk touched her face gently, the same gesture from 6 months ago, but this time it lingered. It explored her hair, her shoulders, as if confirming memory with reality. Then Kaveri turned to her herd and rumbled something in the low-frequency language elephants use, below human hearing but felt in the bones. The herd's agitation visibly decreased. "She's telling them we're not a threat," Dr. Matthews would later say when reviewing the footage from the vehicle's dashboard cameras. "She's vouching for us." But Kaveri wasn't done. She moved to the fallen tree blocking the path, and with a casual display of strength that reminded everyone of her power, she wrapped her trunk around it and pulled. The tree, which would have taken the humans another hour to clear with equipment, moved aside like driftwood. The message was clear. "You helped me, now I help you." But the most extraordinary moment was yet to come. Instead of leading her herd away after clearing the path, Kaveri positioned herself at the front of the human convoy and began walking. Her herd fell in behind the vehicles, creating a protective formation that any military strategist would recognize. "They're escorting us," Harpreet said in amazement. "The elephants are bloody escorting us." Through the treacherous forest path, with visibility near zero and the rain turning everything to mud, the elephant herd guided and protected the human convoy. When a landslide had made the usual path impassable, Kaveri led them through an alternate route, an ancient elephant path that no human map recorded. When they had to cross a swollen stream, the elephants positioned themselves upstream, their massive bodies breaking the current's force. It took 3 hours to reach the viewing camp, 3 hours of the most surreal journey any of them had ever experienced. As they approached, they could hear screams over the storm. The platform was tilting, one of its support pillars having given way. The rescue operation that followed was frantic but successful. Harpreet's crane, guided into position with Kaveri watching like a supervisor, managed to stabilize the platform long enough for everyone to evacuate. Parents passed children down. The elderly were carefully lowered in rescue baskets, and one by one, 30 souls were pulled from danger's reach. But the return journey presented a new problem. The vehicles couldn't carry everyone, and walking in the storm with children and elderly was impossible. It was Chintu who provided the solution, though whether he understood the situation or was simply following his mother's lead remained a mystery. The young bull positioned himself beside the vehicles and knelt, a clear invitation. Kaveri rumbled approval, and one by one, the strongest and most able elephants in the herd offered their backs. "This is insane," one of the tourists, a software engineer from Bangalore, said as he helped his daughter onto an elephant's back. "No one will believe this." "Then it's good we have cameras," Maya replied, her phone capturing everything despite the rain. The journey back was no less remarkable than the journey there. 30 humans, some riding elephants, others in vehicles, all protected by a herd that had no obligation to help, except perhaps the memory of kindness received. The children, initially terrified, quickly became enchanted. One little girl, no more than 6, spent the journey petting the ear of the elderly female elephant she rode, whispering thank you over and over in Hindi. When they finally reached the forest check post, dawn was breaking through the dissipating storm clouds. The elephants stopped at the forest edge, their duty self-appointed and self-completed. The tourists dismounted, many in tears, all in awe. But the most moving moment came when Kaveri approached Priya one last time. This time, she wasn't alone. She gently pushed Asha forward, encouraging her youngest to approach the woman who had saved them all those months ago. Little Asha, still unsteady with her trunk but bright with intelligence, reached out and touched Priya's outstretched hand. It was a passing of trust from one generation to the next, a promise that the bond forged in crisis would echo through time. "The debt is paid, my friend," Priya said softly to Kaveri, tears mixing with rainwater on her cheeks. But Kaveri's response suggested otherwise. The way she rumbled, deep and meaningful, the way she touched Priya's face one more time before turning back to the forest, it all spoke of something beyond debt and payment. It spoke of connection, of the invisible threads that bind all conscious creatures when compassion overcomes fear. Chapter 2. The Ripple Effect. The story of the elephant escort spread like wildfire. Despite the tourists' prediction that no one would believe it, the dashboard camera footage, phone videos, and 30 corroborating witnesses made disbelief impossible. Within a week, international news crews were descending on the small forest town, all wanting to hear about the elephants who had rescued their rescuers. But for Priya and her team, the aftermath was more personal than public. Maya used the experience to revolutionize the Forest Department's approach to human-elephant conflict resolution. Her paper, Reciprocal Altruism in Asian Elephants, a case study in interspecies cooperation, became required reading in wildlife management courses across India. She argued, with Kaveri as proof, that elephants were capable of not just memory, but gratitude that extended to deliberate assistance of humans who had helped them. "We've been managing human-elephant conflict all wrong," she told a gathering of conservationists 6 months later. "We've treated it as a zero-sum game, human or elephant." But Kaveri showed us a third way. Coexistence, based on mutual aid. The practical applications were immediate. The Forest Department established an elephant crisis response unit, specifically trained in rescue operations, that prioritized both human and elephant welfare. No longer would trapped elephants be seen merely as problems to be solved quickly. They would be treated as individuals, capable of remembering and reciprocating kindness. Harpreet, whose construction company had struggled before the rescue, found his expertise in elephant-safe construction suddenly in demand. He developed a series of elephant-friendly infrastructure designs, bridges that could handle elephant crossings, walls that provided safe passages, water installations that served both human and elephant communities. His most innovative creation was an early warning system that detected elephant movement through ground vibrations, giving villages time to prepare for visits without resorting to violence. Kaveri taught me something, he told his workers, many of whom had been part of the rescue. Strength isn't about domination, it's about knowing when to lift others up. Even old Lakshmi Amma found her traditional knowledge suddenly valued. Researchers from the Indian Institute of Science came to interview her about the old stories, the generational wisdom about living alongside elephants that modern science had dismissed as folklore. Her knowledge of elephant behavior, passed down through oral tradition, proved remarkably accurate when tested against modern observation. My grandmother told me elephants never forget a kindness or a cruelty, she told the researchers. She said they pass stories down, mother to calf, about which humans to trust and which to fear. Kaveri will tell Asha about the rescue. Asha will tell her calves. Generations from now, elephants will remember the humans who helped their ancestor. The scientific community initially treated such claims with skepticism, but a longitudinal study launched after the Kaveri incident began yielding remarkable results. Elephants from Kaveri's herd showed markedly different behavior around the rescue team members even in chance encounters months later. They would approach rather than avoid, vocalize in specific patterns that seemed reserved for these humans, and most remarkably, would sometimes bring their young to observe the humans from a safe distance, as if teaching them friend from foe. Dr. James Matthews, collaborating with Oxford's Animal Cognition Lab, published findings suggesting that elephants possessed what he called cultural memory, the ability to transmit learned experiences about specific individuals across generations through mechanisms we were only beginning to understand. We've always known elephants mourn their dead and celebrate their births, he wrote. What Kaveri showed us is that they also honor their debts and teach their children about kindness received. In this, they might be more human than humans. Chapter 3. The Return. It was exactly 1 year after the monsoon rescue when Priya received an unusual call from the forest watchtower. The guard, a young man named Sunil, sounded confused rather than alarmed. "Doctor, you need to come to the old rescue site, the mud pit location. There's something here you should see." Priya arrived to find not an emergency, but a mystery. Around the mud pit, now properly filled and cordoned off thanks to new safety regulations, were arranged several objects, branches from fruit trees, laid out almost decoratively, medicinal leaves that elephants were known to use for digestive issues, and most remarkably, a small pile of salt, rich earth that elephants typically traveled kilometers to find. "Offerings," Lakshmi Amma said, when Priya showed her the photographs. "In our old stories, elephants sometimes leave gifts at places of significance." Camera trap footage revealed the truth. Kaveri's herd had visited the site during the full moon, spending hours there in what could only be described as ceremonial behavior. They had circled the former pit, touching the ground with their trunks, rumbling in those low frequencies that suggested communication. Even little Asha, now a confident young elephant, had participated, carefully placing a branch she had carried for kilometers. But it wasn't until Priya visited the site herself that she understood the full significance. There, drawn in the mud by an elephant's trunk, were patterns, deliberate marks that formed a rough circle around a central point. The central point was exactly where Priya had stood when administering the sedative that had saved Kaveri's life. "They're marking it," Maya breathed when she saw it. "They're marking it as a significant place." The site became an unofficial pilgrimage location, not for tourists, but for conservationists, researchers, and anyone who needed reminding that the animals we share this planet with are far more complex than we often assume. The Forest Department, recognizing its importance, established a small research station nearby, dedicated to studying elephant cognition and social behavior. But the most profound impact was on the local communities. Villages that had once seen elephants only as crop-destroying menaces began to view them differently. If elephants could remember and repay kindness, if they could choose to help humans in crisis, then perhaps coexistence was more than just a conservation slogan. Crop raiding incidents decreased, not because of better fences, but because of better understanding. Farmers began leaving water sources accessible during droughts, understanding that well-hydrated elephants were less likely to raid crops for moisture. When elephants did visit fields, villagers started using gentle deterrence methods taught by the rescue team rather than violence. The economic impact was unexpected, but welcome. Ethical wildlife tourism increased threefold, with visitors coming not for guaranteed elephant sightings, but for the chance to understand the deeper connections possible between species. Local guides, trained by Maya and her team, shared not just facts about elephant behavior, but stories of mutual aid and reciprocal kindness. Chapter 4. The teaching. 2 years had passed since the original rescue, when Priya encountered Kaveri for the last time. It wasn't a dramatic meeting, but a quiet moment that would stay with her forever. She had been tracking an injured leopard through the forest, following blood trails that suggested the animal was seriously hurt. The trail led to a grove of bamboo where she expected to find the leopard. Instead, she found Kaveri's hurt. They were in a teaching circle, a behavior Priya had read about, but never witnessed. The adult elephants had formed a protective ring while the youngsters were in the center, with Kaveri demonstrating something to them. It took Priya a moment to understand what she was seeing. Kaveri was showing the young elephants how to test ground stability, how to recognize the deceptive firmness of mud that could become a trap. She would approach suspicious ground, test it with her trunk, then demonstrate how to back away safely. Each young elephant, including Asha and several others born since the rescue, took turns mimicking her actions. But then Kaveri noticed Priya watching from the bamboo grove's edge. Instead of alarm, the matriarch rumbled that soft greeting Priya had come to recognize. Then, in a gesture that would be debated in scientific journals for years to come, Kaveri deliberately led one of the youngest calves, a male perhaps 6 months old, toward Priya. The calf was nervous, hiding behind his grandmother's legs, pecking out with curious eyes. Kaveri rumbled encouragement, gently pushing him forward. When the calf finally approached, extending his tiny trunk toward Priya's outstretched hand, Kaveri watched with what could only be described as approval. "She's teaching him about us," Priya would later tell her colleagues, still awed by the implications. "She's actively teaching the next generation that we're safe, that we're friends." The moment lasted perhaps 5 minutes, but its impact would last generations. The calf, emboldened by Kaveri's presence, touched Priya's hand, explored her hair, and even play-charged her, in the way young elephants do when they're feeling brave. Each time, Kaveri rumbled approval, reinforcing the lesson that this particular human, and by extension others who behaved similarly, were part of their extended community. When the teaching session ended and the herd moved on, Priya found the injured leopard she had been tracking. It had taken shelter in a cave near where the elephants had been. The leopard, despite its injury, could have been trampled if the elephants had seen it as a threat. Instead, they had clearly known it was there and chosen to leave it in peace. Later, reviewing her notes, Priya realized the profound implications. Kaveri wasn't just teaching her family about one helpful human. She was teaching them about compassion itself, about the choice to help rather than harm, about the possibility of peace between species that should be enemies. Chapter 5. The Legacy. 5 years after the rescue, the Western Ghats had become a model for human-elephant coexistence. The Kaveri Protocol, as it came to be known, was being implemented across India and studied internationally. It was simple in principle but revolutionary in practice. Treat every animal rescue as an opportunity to build interspecies trust, understanding that the rescued animal would carry that experience forward, potentially influencing generations of their kind. The statistics spoke for themselves. Elephant-human conflict deaths had decreased by 70% in the region. Crop raiding incidents, while still occurring, rarely escalated to violence. Most remarkably, there had been 12 documented instances of elephants actively helping humans in various ways, from moving fallen trees blocking roads to guiding lost hikers back to paths. But the numbers only told part of the story. The real change was in hearts and minds, in the stories children grew up hearing, in the way a farmer would pause before reaching for a firecracker to scare away elephants, remembering that these were creatures capable of gratitude and choice. Maya, now director of the Regional Wildlife Conservation Program, had established the Kaveri Foundation, dedicated to training rescue teams, not just in India but across Asia and Africa. The foundation's motto, inscribed in multiple languages at its headquarters, read, "In every rescue, we save not just one life, but countless future relationships." The training was rigorous and holistic. Rescue teams learned not just veterinary techniques, but elephant psychology, family dynamics, and the long-term implications of how rescues were conducted. They studied the Kaveri case in detail, understanding how each decision, from Priya's gentle approach to including Chintu in the recovery process, had contributed to the ultimate outcome. "We're not just rescuers," Maya would tell each new batch of trainees. "We're ambassadors to another species, and every interaction is a diplomatic mission with generational consequences." Dr. Matthews had returned to Oxford, but maintained his research connection to the forest. His book, The Elephant's Gratitude, Cognitive Complexity in Megaherbivores, had become the definitive text on elephant intelligence and emotional capacity. In it, he wrote, "Kaveri forced us to confront our scientific arrogance, our assumption that complex emotions and moral choices were uniquely human. She showed us that gratitude, altruism, and the deliberate teaching of kindness to the next generation exist outside our species. In recognizing this, we don't diminish humanity. We expand it to include all conscious creatures capable of choosing compassion over indifference." Harpreet's construction company had evolved into an international consulting firm specializing in wildlife-friendly infrastructure. His designs were being used from the elephant corridors of Sumatra to the migration routes of the Serengeti. Every project carried a small plaque with an elephant symbol and the words, "Inspired by Kaveri, she changed my life," he would say simply when asked about his motivation. "I was just a man with machines until that day. Now I build bridges, not just over rivers but between worlds." Even Lakshmi Amma, now in her late 80s, had found new purpose. She had become the keeper of stories, recording not just the Kaveri rescue but collecting accounts from across India of positive human-elephant interactions. Her recordings, archived at the Indian Institute of Science, were creating a database of traditional knowledge that was proving invaluable to modern conservation efforts. "Every story matters," she insisted, her voice still strong despite her age. "Our ancestors knew these things. We forgot, but the elephants remembered." Kaveri reminded us. Epilogue, the circle complete. It was a humid morning in August, 7 years after the original rescue, when Priya received word that would close the circle of this remarkable story. A young forest guard had discovered something unusual during a routine patrol. An elderly elephant, clearly ill, who had separated from her herd and was standing in a specific location, seemingly waiting. The location was the original rescue site. Priya arrived to find Kaveri much changed. Age had carved deeper lines into her skin, her movements were slow and deliberate, and her eyes carried the weight of years. But those same eyes brightened when they saw Priya, and her trunk, though trembling slightly, reached out in that familiar greeting. A veterinary examination revealed what Priya had feared: advanced age and systemic organ failure. Elephants, like humans, eventually reached the end of their journey, but what was remarkable was Kaveri's choice of location. She had returned to the place where her life had been saved, not seeking another rescue but perhaps something else entirely. Over the next 3 days, an extraordinary vigil took place. Word spread somehow through the elephant network, and members of Kaveri's herd began arriving. Chintu, now a magnificent bull with his own family group, stood guard. Asha, pregnant with her first calf, maintained constant physical contact with her mother. Even elephants from neighboring herds came, paid their respects, and moved on. The human vigil was no less moving. The entire original rescue team gathered: Priya, Maya, Krishnan, Harpreet. Even Dr. Matthews flew in from England. Lakshmi Amma, too frail to walk, was carried to the site in a chair. The tourists who had been rescued during the monsoon, having stayed in touch through a social media group, arrived from across India. But it wasn't a sad gathering. Stories were shared, laughter mixed with tears, and the boundaries between human and elephant observers seemed to dissolve. Children who had been toddlers during the rescue, now old enough to understand, brought flowers and fruits, leaving them respectfully at a distance. On the third evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson that photographers would later struggle to capture, Kaveri made her final journey. Surrounded by her family, both elephant and human, she passed peacefully, her last breath, a gentle sigh that seemed to carry gratitude for a life fully lived. The aftermath was profound. Elephants performed their morning rituals, returning periodically to visit Kaveri's bones, touching them gently with their trunks. But remarkably, they allowed, even seemed to welcome, human participation in their grief. Priya was permitted to approach, to lay her hand on Kaveri one last time, to say goodbye in her own way. The site became a memorial, not built by human hands, but maintained by elephants who regularly visit, often bringing their young. They don't just remember Kaveri, they seem to remember the entire story, the rescue, the reciprocal aid, the proof that two species can choose to be family despite their differences. Asha gave birth to a daughter 3 months after Kaveri's passing. In a moment that brought tears to even the most scientific observers, she brought the days-old calf to the memorial site. There, in front of the assembled research team, Asha's calf performed a behavior never before documented. She touched the memorial earth, then walked directly to Priya and touched her hand, as if inheriting not just genes, but a covenant of connection. The calf would be named Karuna, compassion, and she would grow up in a world where the story of her grandmother wasn't just history, but living proof that kindness creates ripples across species, across generations, across the artificial boundaries we create between us and them. Reflections. The science of connection. In the years following Kaveri's death, the scientific community struggled to categorize what had occurred. Traditional behavioral biology had no framework for intentional interspecies altruism of this complexity. The event challenged fundamental assumptions about animal cognition, emotional capacity, and the nature of consciousness itself. Dr. Sarah Williams from Cambridge, who had initially been skeptical of the reports, came to study the site and the ongoing elephant behaviors. Her conclusion, published in Nature, was paradigm shifting. We have documented not just individual memory or learned behavior, but the deliberate transmission of cultural values, specifically gratitude and reciprocal altruism, from one generation to the next. The elephants aren't just remembering the rescue, they're teaching its meaning, ensuring that future generations understand the possibility of human-elephant cooperation. This suggests a level of abstract thinking and moral reasoning we've been reluctant to acknowledge in non-human species. The philosophical implications were even more profound. If elephants could choose to help humans not from instinct or training, but from a sense of reciprocal obligation, what did that say about the nature of morality itself? Was compassion not a human invention, but a natural law that transcended species boundaries? These questions transformed conservation philosophy. The traditional model of humans as stewards of nature gave way to a recognition of genuine partnership. Conservation efforts began focusing not just on protecting animals, but on fostering positive interactions that would create lasting bonds between species. The economic model of conservation changed as well. Communities that had once seen wildlife as either a resource to exploit or a problem to solve began recognizing a third option, wildlife, as neighbors and partners. Crop insurance programs were replaced with crop-sharing initiatives, where a percentage of harvest was deliberately left for wildlife, acknowledging their right to the land they had inhabited for millennia. Tourism evolved from observation to participation. Visitors didn't come to see elephants. They came to understand them, to participate in habitat restoration, to learn the stories that connected human and elephant communities. The economic benefits were substantial, but more importantly, they were sustainable, based on respect rather than exploitation. The continuing story. Today, a decade after the original rescue, the Kaveri effect, as researchers call it, has spread far beyond the Western Ghats. Similar protocols have been implemented with various species worldwide: dolphins in Brazil, wolves in North America, even urban wildlife in major cities. Each story adds to a growing database of interspecies cooperation that's rewriting our understanding of the natural world. Maya, now an internationally recognized conservationist, speaks at conferences worldwide, but she always begins with the same words. Let me tell you about an elephant named Kaveri, and how she taught us that rescue isn't just about saving lives, it's about building bridges between worlds. The forest where Kaveri lived has been designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site, not for its biodiversity alone, but for what it represents: a place where two species learn to see each other, not as threats or resources, but as neighbors capable of mutual aid and genuine affection. Priya, still working as a veterinarian, has rescued dogs that she's trained to detect elephants in distress, often finding trapped or injured animals hours before humans would notice. But more often than not, she arrives to find other elephants already helping, having learned from Kaveri's example that cooperation crosses species lines. The mahouts, traditional elephant keepers, have evolved their ancient practice, no longer seeking to dominate elephants, but to partner with them. They tell stories of elephants who refuse to work when asked harshly, but will move mountains when requested with respect. The old chains have been replaced with trust, and productivity has actually increased. In schools across India, children learn about Kaveri alongside historical human heroes. Her story is taught, not as an anomaly, but as an example of what's possible when we approach other species with respect and openness. These children grow up expecting cooperation with wildlife, seeing conflict as a failure of imagination rather than an inevitability. The research station at the rescue site has become a pilgrimage destination for scientists and spiritualists alike. The data collected there has revolutionized our understanding of elephant cognition, but equally important are the moments of connection that can't be quantified. The young elephant who comforts a grieving researcher, the matriarch who guides lost hikers home, the countless small kindnesses that suggest consciousness and compassion aren't limited to humanity. The final teaching. As this story draws to a close, it's worth reflecting on what Kaveri's legacy truly means. In a world increasingly divided, where differences are emphasized over commonalities, she reminded us that kindness transcends the boundaries we create. She showed us that gratitude isn't just a human emotion, but a force that can bridge the gap between species who share this planet. The mud pit that nearly claimed her life has been transformed into a lotus pond, its waters clear and life-giving. Elephants and humans alike come to drink, sometimes at the same time, sharing the space with a comfort that would have seemed impossible before Kaveri's rescue. The lotus flowers that bloom there are considered sacred, not to any religion, but to the idea that from crisis can come connection. From near death can come new life. From a single act of compassion can come generations of cooperation. Asha, now a matriarch herself, leads her herd with the wisdom inherited from her mother. She teaches her calves the old paths through the forest, but also the new understanding that the humans who walk upright aren't all dangerous, that some can be trusted, that help can come from unexpected sources. When she encounters the rescue team members, now aged and grey like herself, she greets them with a rumble of recognition that spans years and species. Karuna, Kaveri's granddaughter, has become something of an ambassador, often approaching research vehicles with curious confidence. She seems to understand her special status, the living bridge between worlds that her grandmother's rescue created. Researchers note that her herd has never experienced human-elephant conflict, as if the peace, negotiated by Kaveri, has been inherited along with genes. The young forest guards who patrol these paths now carry medical supplies for animals alongside their human first aid kits. They've been trained to read elephant body language, to understand the difference between aggression and fear, to respond with help rather than force. Many report encounters where elephants have seemed to deliberately show them injured herd members, trusting in the legacy of assistance Kaveri established. In the villages, children play a game called Kaveri's Rescue, where they take turns being elephants and rescuers, learning through play that helping transcends species. These children will grow up unable to imagine a world where humans and elephants are enemies, where cooperation isn't possible, where kindness doesn't echo across generations. The economic benefits have been substantial. The region has become a model for sustainable development that includes rather than excludes wildlife. But more important than the money is the dignity it has restored. The pride communities feel in being protectors rather than exploiters, partners rather than adversaries. International delegations come to study the Kaveri model, trying to understand how a single rescue could transform an entire region's relationship with wildlife. They take detailed notes, photograph every aspect of the programs, interview all the participants, but what they often miss is the simplest truth. It began with seeing an elephant not as an animal to be saved, but as a fellow being deserving of the same compassion we would want for ourselves. Dr. Matthews, in the final chapter of his second book, wrote, "Kaveri taught us that consciousness isn't binary, human or animal, but exists on a spectrum we're only beginning to understand. She showed us that emotions we considered uniquely human, gratitude, altruism, the desire to teach values to our young, exist throughout the natural world. In recognizing this, we don't lose our specialness. We gain millions of partners in the project of creating a more compassionate world." The never-ending story. As the sun sets over the Western Ghats, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, elephants gather at waterholes, while humans tend their evening fires. The boundaries between their worlds aren't gone, but have become more like permeable membranes, allowing passage of those who approach with respect and peaceful intent. In the research station, young scientists pore over data that continues to challenge and expand our understanding of animal consciousness. Each observation adds another thread to the tapestry of connection. Kaveri began weaving that day in the mud pit. The tourists who were rescued during that torrential monsoon have become advocates in their own communities, sharing not just the dramatic story of elephant-assisted rescue, but the deeper truth it revealed, that we are not alone in our capacity for compassion, that help can come from unexpected sources, that the divisions between species are far less absolute than we imagined. Harpreet's construction sites now include elephant consultants, local mahouts, who ensure that development doesn't disrupt ancient migration routes. His buildings include features specifically designed for wildlife safety and passage, turning potential conflict zones into examples of coexistence. His company's motto, "Building Bridges Between Worlds," has become more than marketing. It's a mission statement that influences every decision. Lakshmi Amma passed away peacefully 3 years after Kaveri, but not before completing her collection of stories. Her granddaughter now maintains the archive, adding new accounts of human-elephant cooperation that arrive weekly from across India and beyond. The stories are published in multiple languages, ensuring that the wisdom of coexistence spreads beyond academic circles to reach the communities who share their land with elephants. The young calf who had first touched Priya during that teaching session in the bamboo grove has grown into a confident young bull. He's been observed multiple times approaching humans in distress, offering help with the same casual confidence his grandmother showed. He seems to understand, perhaps through stories passed down in ways we don't yet comprehend, that some humans are family. The forest paths where this story unfolded have become pilgrimage routes for a new kind of spirituality, one that finds the sacred not in separation from nature, but in connection with it. People walk these paths in silence, hoping for their own moment of interspecies connection, their own proof that the boundaries between human and animal worlds are constructs we can choose to transcend. And somewhere in the forest, as night falls and the world grows quiet, elephants gather in their family groups, rumbling stories we can't quite hear but are beginning to understand. Perhaps they tell of the matriarch who fell but was lifted up, who was saved and became a savior, who taught them that kindness has no species, that help has no boundaries, that gratitude echoes across generations like thunder across mountains. The rescue that began as an emergency response to a single trapped elephant has become something far greater, a proof of possibility, a model for coexistence, a love story between species that reminds us that we are all part of the same fragile, beautiful, interconnected web of life. As Priya wrote in her final report, submitted to the Forest Department, but really written for history, we set out to save an elephant. We ended up saving ourselves, from the loneliness of believing we were the only species capable of compassion, from the arrogance of thinking conservation was about us managing them, from the tragedy of missing the profound connections possible when we approach other species with open hearts and minds. Conclusion: the echo that never ends. The story of Kaveri doesn't end, because stories like this never truly end. They ripple outward, like waves from a stone dropped in still water, touching shores we'll never see, influencing lives we'll never know. In universities around the world, students study the Kaveri case, debating its implications for conservation policy, animal rights, and our understanding of consciousness. In small villages across Asia and Africa, her story is told around evening fires, becoming part of the oral tradition that will outlive any scientific paper. Children who weren't yet born when Kaveri was rescued grow up in a world where human-elephant cooperation isn't remarkable, but expected. They can't imagine why previous generations saw these magnificent creatures as enemies rather than allies. The world has shifted, subtly but fundamentally, because one elephant fell and was lifted up, remembered and repaid, and taught her children that kindness transcends species. The metrics of success aren't just in reduced conflict statistics or increased tourism revenue, though both are significant. The real success is in the smile of a farmer who watches elephants pass through his field and feels pride rather than anger, in the confidence of a child who knows that the forest holds friends as well as dangers, in the peace of communities that have replaced fear with understanding. As Maya often says in her closing remarks at conferences, Kaveri gave us a gift greater than her dramatic rescue of those tourists. She gave us proof that we are not alone in our capacity for love, memory, and gratitude. She showed us that conservation isn't about managing wildlife, but about recognizing them as partners in the shared project of survival. She taught us that every rescue is a conversation, every act of kindness a bridge, every moment of compassion a seed that will bloom in ways we can't imagine. The Western Ghats continue to echo with elephant calls, but now humans hear them differently. Not as threats or disruptions, but as the voices of neighbors checking in, sharing news, living their parallel lives with an awareness of the human world that mirrors our growing awareness of theirs. And in that place where the mud pit once threatened to swallow a life, where lotus flowers now bloom in abundance, there stands an unmarked memorial known to every elephant for miles around. They visit it regularly, touching the earth, with their trunks in what can only be described as remembrance. Sometimes humans are there too, maintaining their own vigil, and sometimes, in moments that transcend scientific explanation, elephant and human eyes meet across that sacred space, sharing an understanding that needs no words, no trumpet calls, no explanation. The debt has been paid many times over, but the relationship endures. Because Kaveri taught us that rescue isn't a transaction but a transformation, that gratitude isn't a response but a way of being, that the connections we forge in crisis can become the foundations of a more compassionate world. Her story continues in every elephant calf taught to trust rather than fear, in every human child raised to help rather than harm, in every moment when two species meet, not as strangers, but as relatives in the vast family of conscious beings sharing this precious planet. The Western Ghats still echo with life, trumpets and birdsong, human voices and elephant rumbles, all weaving together in a symphony of coexistence that Kaveri's rescue made possible. And sometimes, if you listen carefully in the pre-dawn silence when the mist clings to the trees like memory made visible, you can almost hear her, the matriarch who fell and was lifted, who remembered and repaid, who taught us all that love is the only language that truly transcends species. This is not the end of Kaveri's story. It's the beginning of all the stories her rescue made possible. Stories of cooperation over conflict, understanding over fear, love over indifference, stories that will be told as long as elephants walk the earth, and humans have hearts capable of recognizing kinship across the beautiful divide of species. The circle of gratitude Kaveri began continues to expand, ripple by ripple, touching lives she never knew, inspiring rescues she'll never see, building bridges she never walked, but somehow always knew were possible. And somewhere in the forest, as another day dawns over the Western Ghats, a young elephant named Karuna teaches her own calf to approach the world with trust rather than fear, to see in humans not threat but possibility, to carry forward the legacy of a grandmother who proved that kindness echoes across generations, across species, across the artificial boundaries we create, and the natural bridges compassion builds. The rescue continues. The gratitude endures. The story never ends. This story, based on real rescue techniques and elephant behaviors, documented by researchers worldwide, reminds us that the animals we share this planet with are far more complex, emotional, and capable of connection than we often assume. Every day, around the world, rescue teams work tirelessly to save wildlife in crisis. Their work matters not just for the individual animals saved, but for the possibility of connection and coexistence they create. If this story moved you, consider supporting your local wildlife rescue organization. Share this narrative to spread awareness that conservation isn't just about saving animals. It's about recognizing them as partners, worthy of respect, capable of gratitude, and deserving of our very best efforts. The Kaveri in this story may be fictional, but her message is real. Every act of compassion creates ripples we can't imagine. Every rescue is a bridge. Every kindness echoes through time. What connections with wildlife have shaped your understanding of the natural world? Share your own stories of interspecies kindness below, and let's continue building the bridge that Kaveri began.